In the grand halls where royal protocol reigns supreme, and portraits gleam with an almost uncanny precision, there lies an unspoken truth that no royal account ever dares to mention: dependency. Behind the lavish facades and silhouetted crowns rests a shadowy history of vices, suppressed and glossed over. From opium tucked into teacups to brandy sipped discreetly in council meetings, these addictions were present, yet meticulously obscured. What happens when the public persona demands poise, while your private reality is quietly disintegrating? Today, we unearth the concealed narratives of 30 royals and the clandestine addictions they masked beneath the crown. Welcome to the tale of 30 British royals with secret addiction. Before we embark on this journey, don't forget to subscribe, not merely for more enigmas, but because the royal mysteries often require a guiding hand. Also, let us know where you're tuning in from. Share your location and the hour on the clock. Be it midnight, noon, or those twilight hours, let's uncover who else traverses the pathways of royal history alongside you. Our first royal tale belongs to King George IV, born in 1762 and departing in 1830. He is often remembered as the ostentatious Prince Regent, a monarch cloaked in velvet, adorned with powdered wigs, and grandiose architectural ambitions. Yet, beyond the lavish appearances, lay a man gradually unraveling under the heavy pull of daily indulgence. George was not only addicted to the trappings of grandeur but also to the substances elevating that grandeur. Prominent among these were alcohol and laudanum. For those unfamiliar, laudanum was 19th century Britain's cure-all, whether for toothache, sorrow, heartbreak, or ennui at the court. Unlike ordinary subjects who used it hesitantly, George consumed it without boundaries, as though unaware of the fine line where pleasure gives way to addiction. His fondness for alcohol was equally excessive, taking in quantities that would have incapacitated a lesser man long before he assumed the throne. Wine, brandy, punch, and gin were his staples, often consumed to dull both his physical ailments and his conscience. His wine cellar was vast enough to warrant its own staff, a testament to his unrelenting indulgence. Dinner at his table was a spectacle of excess, not necessarily for consumption, but a display of lavishness itself. What makes George IV's saga particularly disturbingly fascinating is how his dependencies thrived behind a meticulously polished facade. Official portraits portrayed him as the epitome of regal vitality, despite his staggering weight and struggles to mount stairs without aid. The court painters effectively airbrushed him into a fabricated ideal. Public outings were carefully curated affairs, limited and often disguised with vague proclamations of rest and recovery from minor ailments. A physician's private letter later revealed that his liver was alarmingly enlarged, and his bowels, unfortunately, unsuited for an empire's ruler. Speculation abounds regarding his descent into dependency. Some trace it to the tumultuous marriage with Caroline of Brunswick, viewed more as a political transaction than a romance. Others point to the heart-wrenching loss of his daughter, Princess Charlotte. Yet, perhaps it was the crushing weight of ruling a faltering empire while grappling with the decay of his own body that truly drove him. Eventually, insiders recounted the ordeal of managing George's volatile moods and episodes, often influenced by his substances. Reports arose of fits of rage followed by paralyzing silences, while physicians relentlessly administered tonics and further laudanum, creating a vicious cycle of reliance. It was the royal rendition of appearing hungover in one's own existence, day after day, with no reprieve. For the public, however, the narrative remained intact. George IV was projected as a steadfast icon of tradition and national pride, even as he staggered, both in body and spirit, through his twilight years. Upon his passing, the headlines reflected a reverence reserved for deities, yet no mention was made of the bottles, the pills, and the quiet disintegration behind draped silk. Thus, the image of royalty persisted, immaculate, composed, untouchable. Underneath lingered a raw truth, like a ghostly trace of cigar smoke trailing from a hidden secret. Even kings can be ensnared by their dependencies. And frequently, the more extravagant the royal mask, the more desperate the individual concealed beneath it. Not to forget, George was not the solitary figure lost in the fog of habits. Indeed, his own son would later take the throne, cloaked in charm yet secretly engulfed in a haze of cigar smoke that could saturate Buckingham Palace itself. Two kings have traversed history before us, with King Edward III reigning from 1841 to 1910. If his predecessor, King George IV, hid his vices behind velvet drapery and portraits, Edward III skillfully cloaked his indulgences with charisma. This charm had an almost magical ability to distract from his less honourable activities, the misappropriated funds, the excessive cigars consumed before the sun even peeked over the horizon. For 60 arduous years, Edward existed as the Prince of Wales, biding his time as his mother, Queen Victoria, lingered on. And linger she did. Thus, a man emerged, burdened by the trifecta of too much leisure, opulence, and scant responsibilities, an alchemic disaster for a man destined for royal duty, especially one with a predisposed penchant for excess. Edward's passions were gambling and smoking, but not in the refined, gentlemanly manner one might expect. No, Edward indulged in anywhere from 12 to 20 cigars daily, excluding his cigarette interludes. His cigars, objects of such devotion they were imported and preserved according to his exacting desires, accompanied him in meetings, car rides, at dinner, and even during his final moments. They were more than mere tobacco. They represented a tangible control in a life where little was actually his to command. While his gambling activities were less routine, they erupted with a ferocity that left a mark. Losses amassed not just in the swanky casinos of Paris and Monte Carlo, but within the drawing rooms of the British elite. A notorious night in 1890 at a private baccarat table unveiled a scandal as newspapers gingerly hinted at his indiscretions. Yet, the truth, revealed in later biographies, depicted a man shattering royal decorum, entangled in debts and entreaties that would have landed others in jail. Nonetheless, public opinion never seemed to tarnish his reputation. His charismatic personality, imbued with a spirited appreciation for life, allowed Edward to escape outright condemnation. His excesses transformed into charming tales rather than scandals, deftly downplayed by a network of loyal friends. Yet behind the curtain of royalty, palisades scrambled to rein him in, fretting over his public image tainted with cigar smoke and accumulating gambling debts. Despite a royal servant's complaints about carcinogenic clutches gripping the palace, no one dared directly challenge him. After all, he was the heir apparent, enveloped in an aura of invulnerability. By the time Edward ascended the throne in 1901, he was already 59, his health suffering from the ravages of his smoking habit. His reign lasted a mere 9 years, yet he cultivated an image of an amiable diplomat, adept in both royal and gambling circles, able to bewitch the room even as clouds of smoke loomed. While his dependencies went largely unrecognized in official circles, whispers of them circulated in memoirs and court gossip. Still, nothing diminished the mythos around him. Edward III was not viewed as a disintegrating figure, but rather as one who transformed vice into casual enjoyment, especially in stark contrast to his predecessor's haunted legacies. But with the dawn of George V arose a new chapter, a different breed of addiction, not one marked by the pulse of exuberance, but by a steady, insidious dependency. The story unfolds further as we peel back the layers of royal mysteries. If you're along for this journey, be sure to subscribe so you won't miss future revelations about palace intrigues. And share with us, where are you watching from? Morning coffee or a midnight query? Join the conversation below. You're not the only night owl tonight. In the shadowy corridors of history, we encounter the enigmatic figure of King George V, who reigned from 1865 to 1936. Unlike his father, Edward VII, who lived indulgently, often seen in laughter amidst his scandals, George V approached life with a stern sense of responsibility, his regimen deeply infused with nicotine, a substance he seemed to rely on as much for duty as for solace. While Edward revelled in opulence, George adhered to a structured life, marked by a stoicism that at times appeared almost comical. Yet, concealed beneath this austere facade was a profound addiction that consumed him. His smoking, a relentless ritual of up to 20 cigarettes a day, became an indispensable part of his existence rather than a mere indulgence. His personal notes reveal a ruler who lit up not in celebration, but as a means of coping, battling through sterile meetings and the oppressive responsibilities of leading a waning empire. In contrast to his father's flamboyant demeanor, George's dependency manifested in quiet habits and a systematic reliance on that familiar cigarette. His fingers often found themselves in the customary pose even when a cigarette was absent, as if the act of smoking had become embodied, a ritual steeped in routine. His doctors and staff certainly noted this phenomenon, though the public remained blissfully unaware. The early 20th century demanded a polished image, one of unshakable authority, casting George V as the epitome of strength amidst growing instability. As royal physicians worked to combat his worsening health, chronic bronchitis, emphysema, and throat issues, all exacerbated by his smoking, the palace narrative stubbornly downplayed the severity of his condition. Reports on his health would mention only minor setbacks, while he secretly battled for breath, enduring oxygen treatments and pharmaceuticals just to maintain his royal duties. Private diaries from royal aides later revealed that his mornings began with tea, cigarettes, and contemplative silence, an almost sacred ritual for a monarch who projected an air of control, a control that was, in truth, crumbling. Ruling over a collapsing empire, with familial ties frayed by revolution, George V faced a nation growing weary of its monarchy's pomp and reliance on ceremonial grandeur. His addiction was not a spectacle but rather a subtle downfall, each additional cigarette a fleeting victory to tackle another briefing or public appearance, an act of feigning normalcy. He passed away in 1936, officially cited as succumbing to lung-related issues, yet the true nature of his decline remained obscured. His doctor's final act was a morphine cocktail, not for salvation but to ensure a dignified departure before the morning papers. Even in death, the facade lived on. A monarch who exhaled through 2 world wars and witnessed an empire teetering on the brink departed with an image intact, one that honored dignity over truth. Though the monarchy never acknowledged George V's smoking habit, the signs were plain: yellowing fingers, a raspy voice, and lungs that struggled to function told a greater story. His legacy, framed as one of unwavering duty, belied the heavy toll behind that polished veneer. And as the curtain fell on George V's reign, a new era awaited his son, George VI, who not only inherited the throne but also that same pivotal reliance on smoke and drink, a burden heavy with anxiety that proved itself tragically audible and ultimately fatal. In the annals of reluctant royalty, King George VI stands apart, not for grand accomplishments, but for the grueling effort required to fulfill his royal role. Remembered as the stoic hero of wartime Britain and the stammering monarch who discovered his voice just in time to unite a nation, the truth behind his story reveals a man plagued by anxiety. To soothe his nerves, he turned to 2 steadfast companions: alcohol and cigarettes. For George VI, as for his father, these were not mere vices but vital necessities. As the overlooked younger sibling, he grew up overshadowed by his charming elder brother, Edward VIII, and no one, least of all George VI himself, anticipated his ascension to the throne. Yet, when Edward abdicated in 1936 to marry Wallis Simpson, George found himself pressed into a role for which he was entirely unprepared. He coped with rituals and restraint, alongside an ever-deepening reliance on substances that blurred the edges of royal expectation. His smoking began in youth, quickly escalating. By his 30s, he was over a pack a day, and this habit doubled in his 40s. His aides carefully curated his public image, skillfully hiding the ever-present ashtrays and his nervous pre-speech pacing. The photographs chosen with meticulous precision concealed his gaunt appearance, the greyed skin, and the hollow look of his eyes during state functions. If Monarchy was a grand theatre, George VI was the unrelenting stagehand, forever performing, yet never at ease. And then there was his drinking. Unlike his father, who drank with pomp, George VI relied on gin, steady and frequent, using it to soften the rigours of royal duties. Staff members recall his ritual of a strong drink before broadcasts, followed by incessant chain smoking as he recovered. What he did wasn't for pleasure. It was about mere survival. Doctors, aware of his plight, chose their words carefully, offering gentle suggestions rather than confronting the escalating issue. By the 1940s, his health was visibly fading, but public statements assured a different narrative of recovery and light work. Yet the grim truth lay beneath. He was quietly succumbing under the immense pressures and self-induced toxins. In 1951, surgery for lung cancer beckoned, though the word cancer remained unspoken publicly. Having part of his left lung removed, he returned to his duties promptly, cloaked in scarves, supported by aides, and projecting smiles through the agony. That year, he bid farewell to his daughter Elizabeth at the airport for what would be their last meeting. George VI passed away in his sleep in 1952 at the age of 56, a monarch worn down by war and years of self-medicating. The official narrative cited coronary thrombosis, a polite term that skims over the deeper truth of a body deteriorated by stress and silence. The public mourned a steadfast king, oblivious to the true price of his strength. He inherited a crown he never desired, endured a stammer that betrayed him, and leaned on quiet addictions to mend the painful chasm between duty and self. Yet, even in death, his royal dignity remained unblemished. The lineage would continue, but the next in line, unlike him, would blur the lines of aristocratic leisure into something far more consuming. 5. Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, lived from 1900 until 2002, a symbol of grace and strength within the British monarchy. She was affectionately known as the Queen Mum, her unyielding demeanour as constant as the pearls that adorned her neck and her handbag, an emblem of propriety. To the public, she was a pillar of British fortitude, steadfast during the Blitz, gazing out from palace windows like an exquisite figurine, seemingly untouched by fear, and living longer than nearly all those she held dear, her smile almost supernatural. Yet, behind this charming facade lay a truth rarely brought into the light. The Queen Mother maintained a steady, unremarkable relationship with alcohol, not scandalous or destructive but woven into the very fabric of her daily life. Her drink of choice, a carefully prepared mix of gin and dubonnet, served with 2 wedges of lemon, became a routine part of her day, sometimes beginning before lunch and continuing into the evening. This wasn't a tale of wild revelry. It was a refined, aristocratic rhythm, shrouded in silence yet deeply ingrained in her life. For decades, this secret was tucked away within the larger narrative of her unwavering spirit. Her affection for a drink was gently softened with phrases like her daily tipple or a little something to keep her going. Biographers, especially during her lifetime, approached this delicate topic with caution, fearing that too much transparency could disrupt the national balance. However, those who worked in the palace revealed a more complex picture. Former staff, once they retired, would mention how her days unfolded with the cadence of alcohol as if it were as normal as tea time. One footman noted that the drinks tray was as punctual as the schedule for the royal hounds, and another attendant spoke of a palace steeped in ritual, with cocktails as a part of that tradition. Yet, it was significant that no one ever labelled her a drunk. Her relationship with alcohol was discreet, measured, weaving seamlessly into her existence without excess. The Queen Mother faced formidable personal challenges: 2 world wars, the loss of a beloved husband, and the monarchy's near collapse. Through it all, she maintained her poise and elegance, adjusting her hat, keeping her smile unwavering, and if a few glasses of fortified wine were needed before dinner, that was strictly her affair. The most fascinating, and somewhat disquieting, aspect of this narrative is how thoroughly her dependence on alcohol became normalized. It escaped media scrutiny and public concern, her image sculpted by the royal myth as untouchable, the Queen Mother, the last empress, the nation's grandmother. In this retelling, Jin transformed from a dependency to a mere detail of her character. Yet, while her public persona remained untarnished, her daughter, Princess Margaret, would not share the same fortune of discretion. The Queen Mother's relationship with alcohol was enveloped in nostalgia and pearls, while Margaret's story would be intertwined with scandal, smoke, and the slow decline of a woman grappling with her own legacy. 6. Princess Margaret, a figure of fascination and complexity from 1930 to 2002, embodied a lifestyle that starkly contrasted that of her sister, Queen Elizabeth II. If the Queen Mother navigated royal duties with grace and propriety, Margaret burst forth onto the scene, martini in one hand, cigarette in the other. At least, that's the narrative spun by the tabloids. She was glamorous, rebellious, and impulsive, everything her sister was not. Yet, beneath the dazzling tiaras and sun-soaked retreats lay a woman increasingly overwhelmed by the very stage of her birth. Her battles with alcohol, cigarettes, prescription pills, and perhaps most tragically, the craving for visibility, were apparent, tolerated initially until they could no longer be ignored. As the younger sister, often seen as the secondary player, she wore her duality of resentment and acceptance like a crown. Her formative years were drenched in the shimmer of her sister's destined reign. She may never don the crown, but she was undeniably royal. Margaret embraced this identity with flamboyance. With a public cigarette, dancing among nightlife, and striking red nails, a symbol of defiance, she effortlessly commanded attention, often resembling a model straight from fashion's glossy pages. Yet this allure came with an unyielding toll. The ceaseless demand to captivate and the scrutiny that followed her falters laid heavy on her shoulders. Her reliance on alcohol started as an everyday ritual: whiskey before lunch, wine at dinner, and brandy to wind down. Over time, these drinks evolved from pleasurable custom to oppressive necessity. Close friends witnessed her acid humor diminish, replaced by drunken slurs and chilling silence, revealing a descent into something far more somber and isolating. The grip of her nicotine habit was equally fierce, with reports of her smoking up to 60 cigarettes daily. In the wake of societal pressures or post-party solitude, pills became her vice, tranquilizers and sleeping medications to smooth the jagged edges of her highs and lows. All entirely legal, yet equally part of a carefully curated life. Despite the chaos, the palace clung to appearances. For years, her drinking was dismissed as merely eccentric and her smoking viewed as a quirk of her generation. The public relished in her laughter and extravagant holidays, blissfully unaware of the shadows that loomed, the missed gatherings, the retreats behind closed curtains, and the personal crises hidden from the world. After suffering strokes in the late 1990s, polite terminology shielded the truth of her physical decline, which became impossible to gloss over. When she passed away in 2002 at the age of 71, She carried the weight of a life rich with contradictions, diminished yet surrounded by a legacy both rebellious and compelling. A woman consumed by her title, blazing brightly yet ultimately alone. Margaret's narrative, however, mirrors a saga from centuries past. Nearly 400 years prior, another royal, at once feared and powerful, also succumbed to excess not of cocktails, but of feasts and opiates, ensnared in a grandeur that masked a similarly troubling downfall. 7. King Henry VIII, whose reign spanned from 1491 to 1547, existed in a time long before Buckingham Palace had a press office or the Windsor family mastered the art of managing their image. In his world, Henry ruled with an iron fist, a king who didn't need to hide behind platitudes because his authority rendered truth optional. He was the notorious monarch of England, known for his 6 marriages and an insatiable thirst for control. Publicly, he embodied strength, but privately, he was a man deteriorating, kept upright by excessive eating, indulgent wine, and early forms of pain relief that today would be identified as narcotic dependencies. In his younger years, Henry cut a striking figure, athletic, charismatic, the quintessential Renaissance man with his jousting skills and education in Latin. However, as he aged, he became morbidly obese and immobile, plagued by health issues that included chronic leg ulcers, insomnia, gout, and unpredictable mood swings that transformed court life into a precarious affair. To cope with his physical and possibly emotional suffering, Henry relied on what his physicians described as soothing tonics. These were no mere herbal remedies. They were primitive versions of modern opiates, concoctions of poppy and mandrake, sometimes tainted with mercury. They offered respite from his beleaguered legs, which endured infections so severe that even his stanchest supporters struggled to approach him. These concoctions provided relief from his sleepless nights and calmed his volatile emotions, but their use took a toll. His correspondence grew erratic, his decisions increasingly paranoid, and his relationship with food escalated to alarming extremes. Lavish feasts became his source of therapy, tables sagging beneath immense quantities of rich pies, meats, and sweet wines, as if a gastronomic abundance could drown out the decay of his body. The portraits of Henry famously portray him as a formidable king in armor, powerful and undaunted. Yet the reality was far less flattering. By the 1540s, he required machinery to help lift him into bed, but the word dependence was unuttered among courtiers. The concept of addiction was foreign, particularly for a king. When Henry insisted on wine with breakfast and opium with dinner, it was seen not as a vice but as a royal privilege. Even his doctors, who privately recorded his declining health, spoke in euphemisms. The king simply needed his tincture. His Majesty found solace in the cordial. This was loyalty veiled in silence. Historians today, sifting through historical documents and medical records, have slowly pieced together what was never named in Henry's time. He medicated himself to maintain functionality. His well-known fits of rage, abrupt executions, and swift religious changes may have had less to do with divine intuition and more to do with the ebb and flow of chemicals in his body. A king both empowered and diminished by the substances designed to keep him upright. Yet, despite his physical decline, the legend of King Henry endured. His power formed an impenetrable shield against scrutiny, ensuring his myth lingered through history. The image of the bloated, medicated, pain-ridden monarch morphed into that of a colossal figure clothed in armor. Yet Henry wasn't the sole ruler to wield contradiction as a weapon. Fast forward a century, and we find another king, James, the first of England from 1566 to 1625. In 1604, he unleashed a vehement essay titled A Counterblast to Tobacco, scorning the practice of smoking as loathsome to the eye and detrimental to health. This vehement outcry suggested a ruler unwilling to tolerate the insidious spread of tobacco. However, the reality was more complex. While James authored the era's most renowned anti-smoking manifesto, evidence hints at a past where he sometimes indulged in the habit. As a young man, long before he ascended to the English throne, James VI of Scotland mingled among courtiers who freely enjoyed tobacco, a trend imported from the Iberian nobility. Early accounts suggest that during social gatherings in the late 1580s, James might have partaken himself, as tobacco was then viewed as both medicinal and exotic. Yet as he matured into his dual kingship of Scotland and England, his public persona shifted to that of a moral guide, condemning vice from the pulpit while battling the tobacco tradition that seemed to corrupt society. His essay drew vivid parallels between the foul smoke of tobacco and the stench of hell, but behind palace walls, his stance was anything but clear-cut. Historians speculate that his zealous opposition to tobacco stemmed not from principle but rather frustration, perhaps even stemming from his own experimentation with smoking. No definitive proof marks him as a lifelong smoker, yet whispers in the diplomatic corridors suggest he may have abandoned the habit, leaving behind a conflicted legacy. Regardless of whether he relished tobacco in his youth, what remains compelling is how fiercely he sought to distance himself from it publicly, highlighting the chasm between his private inclinations and his performative role as monarch. His striking disdain for smoking conveniently aligned with economic motives, allowing him to impose taxes on imported tobacco while vocally denouncing its use, a clever maneuver cloaked in the guise of virtue. This dichotomy encapsulates the enduring struggle between personal desires and public perception, resonating through time and echoing in the lives of future rulers. A narrative that serves as a resonant reminder of the relentless pursuit of image, a pursuit that persists even now. In the twilight of history, we encounter Queen Anne, who reigned from 1665 until her death in 1714. To the world, she embodied both frailty and divine perseverance. A devout, gentle ruler, she was plagued by personal suffering, reluctantly assuming the crown which bore little splendor in historical accounts. And, the final monarch of the Stuart line, was shrouded in tragedy and warfare, seemingly a blend of mourning and reverence. Yet beneath that somber facade, a relentless battle against both physical and emotional pain raged on. And within that quiet struggle, a hidden companion emerged: alcohol. Anne's reign was marked by contradictions. She was both a ruler and a solitary figure, mourning the loss of 17 children through miscarriage, stillbirth, and early death, a heart-wrenching reality that transcends mere statistics, becoming trauma that haunted her year after year. Compounded by chronic ailments such as gout and dropsy, her mobility became increasingly limited. In her later years, she found herself reliant on assistance or a sedan chair for movement. Yet, society expected a regal demeanor, demanding she showcase strength and control even in times of great personal weakness. As many royals have done, she sought comfort in secrecy. Contemporary writings, from private letters to court diaries, hint at her growing dependence on wine and brandy within the confines of her chambers, a space where she could be genuine, unfettered by scrutiny. Her indulgence in alcohol rarely made its way into official records, veiled instead in euphemisms like medicinal comforts or soothing elixirs. One physician's discreet letter spoke of her evening tonics, suggesting a hushed awareness among her close companions. Her ladies-in-waiting sometimes discovered her asleep during the afternoons, having excused herself due to a headache. Ministers whispered of her withdrawn nature, her overly complicated relationships, most notably with Sarah Churchill, the Duchess of Marlborough, reflecting a mind fraught with fatigue and the complexities of her circumstances. The expectations of the era demanded a stoic monarch, and Anne made concerted efforts to comply. She fulfilled her church duties and sponsored scholarship, all while shunning the ostentation that marked her predecessors. Yet behind the closed doors, A more intimate reality unfurled. Alcohol was not an act of rebellion. It became her salve, a means to endure the heavy burdens of loss, expectation, and physical decline. In an age devoid of effective painkillers or antidepressants, wine served as one of the few accessible alleviations, sparing her the torment of more archaic medical treatments. Unlike those who would follow her, and did not possess the advantage of modern public relations, the court meticulously preserved her public image. Whenever she faltered at events, health troubles were cited without mention of the brandy that may have blurred her edges just enough to face her duties. At the age of 49, and passed away, her body weary, swollen, and medicated both by her physicians and her own choices. Officially, she succumbed to gout and dropsy complications. Yet beneath that diagnosis lay a woman who navigated the relentless grip of pain through silent reliance on alcohol. It isn't lost in history that and wasn't the sole royal to mask her vulnerabilities with indulgence. Her contemporaries, particularly a certain King Charles II, would weave similar narratives. Charles reigns in our memories as the merry monarch, yet beneath that facade lay a man who found mirth within a tightly packed world of revelry. Though he painted the court with laughter, he too struggled with an unquenchable thirst, a daily cocktail of tonics and restorative brews, many containing opiates and other substances that served to sustain his thrilling lifestyle. To onlookers, he was the vivacious king who reawakened a weary nation, but to his physicians, he was a patient marked by contradictory health issues, a man full of energy by day but plagued by insomnia and fatigue by night. His remedies, often consumed from ornate bottles, carried reassuring titles, but belied dangerous ingredients recognized today as harmful. Behind the vibrant masquerade, he fought against ailments that were chronic yet concealed from public view. Charles's affliction was a hidden reality, masked by charm and charisma, seamlessly interwoven into his image of vitality and life. As he aged, Charles had to navigate his increasing reliance on these medical marvels, all the while maintaining the facade of the merry and lively monarch. The irony dances as many of the same physicians who administered his treatment later scrambled to save him from its consequences. In his final days, historians suggest he suffered from a stroke, an affliction exacerbated by years of excess. Surrounded by alchemists and the paraphernalia of medicinal tonics, he remained the charming monarch until the end, his body deteriorating beneath the crown. Charles's legacy is a poignant reminder of the duality of royalty, a life characterized by excess and silence, where indulgence met vulnerability. His nephew, too, would rise to the throne carrying not just the crown but a penchant for risk, leaving behind a deeply ingrained legacy of concealed struggles intertwined with the fabric of history. Prince Frederick, Duke of York, lived from 1763 to 1827, and though nursery rhymes may depict him as a general who simply marched his men up and down a hill, his true legacy runs far deeper. As the second son of King George III and Commander-in-Chief of the British Army, Frederick orchestrated military reforms that influenced Britain's defence structure for years. Yet, beneath this facade of respectability lay a troubling penchant for gambling and drinking. A royal with a reckless approach not only to military strategy but also to staggering debts, many of which were not his own. To the public eye, Frederick embodied the disciplined military leader, calm and competent. Behind closed doors, however, he grappled with a dice addiction, a penchant for cards, and a fondness for expensive wine. While gambling among the aristocracy was commonplace, Frederick indulged excessively. His gambling led to substantial losses that often exceeded his means, though means is relative when one has the full backing of the British taxpayer. His financial situation deteriorated rapidly, as contemporary letters and court documents illustrate, a man perpetually ensnared in debt, borrowing frequently, repaying slowly, and sometimes needing discreet interventions from Parliament to ease his burdens. These discussions were cloaked in secrecy, demonstrating the lengths taken to uphold royal dignity even in times of financial distress. Frederick's alcohol consumption, consistent and ritualistic, did not raise eyebrows by the standards of the 18th century, yet it contributed to his eventual health decline. Friends observed his frequent absences but remained devoted. After all, he was a member of royalty, and his habits were viewed more as quirks than problems. Yet, even the facade cracked, most notably during the scandal involving Marion Clark, his former mistress who was accused of selling army commissions, allegedly with his involvement. This tumult nearly obliterated his reputation, leading to a temporary resignation from his military duties. While his gambling and drinking were never explicitly noted as causes, biographers suggest that his tumultuous personal life left him susceptible to exploitation. Despite these upheavals, Frederick's return to public service restored much of his standing, and history chooses to remember him as the reformer of the army, the royal uncle who modernized British defense. His personal struggles are often relegated to the shadows, unacknowledged footnotes in the annals of history. Yet Frederick's tale serves as a poignant reminder that behind every title and uniform lies a person grappling with the weight of expectation. As Frederick sought solace in wine and cards, another royal, shrouded in mourning, reached for a different kind of release, a potent blend of grief carefully tucked away in a bottle of laudanum. Queen Victoria, reigning from 1819 to 1901, stood as the emblem of British imperial glory for over 60 years. She commanded an empire so expansive that it was famously said the sun never set on it. Publicly, she embodied the ideals of fidelity, national unity, and unwavering resolve. Yet, hidden beneath her sambre black dresses and stern declarations was a woman grappling with profound grief, resorting to self-medication through the turmoil of her sorrow. A testament to her psychological struggle emerged in the tragic aftermath of her beloved Prince Albert's passing in 1861, a moment that plunged her into deep mourning. This mourning was far from performative. It was a complete psychological withdrawal. She wore black for the remainder of her days and demanded that Albert's rooms remain untouched, a testament to an unhealed wound. Though the world viewed her mourning as a moral statement, for Victoria, it was an enduring ache that she sought to soothe with laudanum and chloroform, commonly used remedies of her era. Laudanum, a mixture of opium and alcohol, served as a remedy for a variety of ailments, from headaches to melancholia, and it was accessible without prescription. Her doctors prescribed it under cautiously cautious terminology, aiming to alleviate her insomnia, manage stress, and quiet her nerves. Nevertheless, the euphemisms cloaked a harsher reality. The Queen relied on opiates to mask emotional turmoil that no public facade could mend. Although her diaries, edited by her daughter Beatrice, retain traces of this dependency, depicting moments where she took her drops or sought comfort from her doctor's mixtures, she remained largely functional in public. The court's physicians noted her growing tolerance to the substances over the years, leading to the need for stronger doses to achieve respite. Then, enter chloroform, the latest anesthetic sensation of the mid-19th century, which she used during the births of her 8th and 9th children. Controversially, she faced criticism for taking it, yet she found solace in its effects, even calling it a blessed relief in private correspondence. This silent affinity for pharmacological comfort resonated amidst her rigid life dictated by tradition. For the public, the image of Queen Victoria remained uncompromising, a staunch matriarch and moral beacon, but the reality of her substance use contradicted the idealized narrative. Her struggles were not unique. Secrets lurked in royal histories. Take her grandson, Albert Edward, Duke of Clarence, who faded into a shadow of speculation, leaving behind unresolved questions. Born in 1864, he was the heir apparent yet tragically passed away at just 28, officially due to pneumonia contracted during influenza. However, beneath the surface, murmurs of substance abuse hovered around him, tales of an addiction to alcohol and morphine clouding his brief existence. Princess Alice of Battenberg, who lived from 1885 to 1969, may not fit the mold of royals with secret struggles at first glance. Never a reigning monarch, she was neither embraced by elite social circles nor seen on any throne. Yet, the intricacies of Alice's life reveal a haunting narrative, far deeper than mere crowns and lineage might convey. Born into royalty, entwined in a royal marriage, and the mother of royalty herself, Alice often found herself dwelling in the shadowy corners of the royal sphere, overlooked, isolated, and medicated into silence. Known as the mother of Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, Alice was born deaf but triumphed by mastering lip reading in different languages, a testament to her keen intellect and unyielding spirit. During her youth, she radiated charm, intelligence, and profound faith. However, her marriage to Prince Andrew of Greece and Denmark marked the beginning of a turbulent journey characterized by political exile, conflict, and personal turmoil. This instability gradually manifested in clinical ways. By the 1930s, her increasingly erratic behavior led to a diagnosis vaguely termed schizophrenia, a contentious label still debated among historians and psychologists today. The blurry boundaries of psychiatry at the time, along with Alice's symptoms being both psychological and spiritual, complicate her story. She spoke of divine visions and believed in her own healing abilities, traits that bewildered her aristocratic family and doctors alike, ultimately resulting in her institutionalization in a Swiss sanitarium, reportedly against her will. This dark chapter of her life saw Alice undergoing heavy sedation, a common practice in pre-war Europe often shunned in later discussions. Medical records reveal that she was treated with early tranquilizers and sedatives, barbiturates and similar drugs meant to silence rather than heal. It wasn't an addiction of choice. Rather, she was compelled into compliance by those around her. Her authentic spiritual encounters were reinterpreted as mere symptoms of illness, her uniqueness recast as instability. The royal family maintained a veil of silence over her plight, with little information shared with her children. Prince Philip was distanced from her during this bleak time, as royal correspondence indicates a desire to bury this private embarrassment, evading it like a taboo. Yet, an extraordinary resurgence occurred. In the chaos of World War II, Alice emerged anew in Athens, not as a troubled royal but as a nun. She founded a religious order, dedicating her life to caring for the sick and sheltering Jewish families from the Nazis. Her return was as enigmatic as her earlier collapse. No concrete medical records or explanations to reveal her transformation. Alice had discovered a newfound purpose and identity, leaving her past drug-induced compliance behind. Nevertheless, her years spent under watch, subdued, ignite questions still unanswered. Was her struggle genuine illness, or was she merely too unconventional for her era? And how many other royals, labeled as eccentric or unstable, were similarly silenced through medication? Little did history know that just a few decades later, another royal, radiant, captivating, and ever-present in public life, would secretly contend with an even more dire addiction, a long-standing dependency on powerful substances like morphine and cocaine. Prince George, Duke of Kent, a man whose life unfolded between the world of the aristocracy and the shadows of personal struggle, was born in 1902 into a royal lineage marked by grandeur. The younger sibling of two kings, Edward VIII and George VI, he appeared as the epitome of the modern royal man, urbane, strikingly handsome, and cosmopolitan in every sense. Yet beneath the polished exterior lay a deeper narrative, woven with secrecy, paradoxes, and an addiction that would spiral beyond concealment. Throughout his life, Prince George oscillated between the elegance of his noble heritage and a yearning for the ordinary. He ventured into civilian work, learning to fly and mingling with creative minds, creating a vibrant social tapestry that stood in stark contrast to the traditional royal court. He traversed elite circles throughout Europe, becoming a familiar figure in the lively nightlife of Paris, Vienna, and Berlin. But with each encounter, the shadows of his dependencies lingered. Unlike other members of the royal family, whose battles with addiction remained muted, George's struggles with morphine and cocaine came to light through biographical accounts and declassified information, gradually eroding the walls of royal discretion in the post-war era. His foray into drug use is thought to have commenced in the late 1920s amid personal turmoil and dissatisfaction in his professional life. It was a quest for both escape and a semblance of control. Morphine muted the chaos while cocaine heightened his senses. This duality birthed a troubling cycle, one documented by those close to him who witnessed his dramatic mood shifts, from bursts of euphoric energy to days shrouded in deep despair. His public persona remained magnetic, yet maintaining that facade grew increasingly challenging. The royal family, ever composed, undertook discreet measures to manage the situation. Interventions were staged, and he was given structured roles involving travel, including a return to the Navy and a position in the newly formed Royal Air Force. Ostensibly, he served his nation, yet behind the curtains, his life was being orchestrated, contained, and redirected. Reports suggest that intelligence services were keeping an informal watch on him, not due to fears of betrayal, but rather to prevent any potential scandal from surfacing. The enigma surrounding his fate deepened following his untimely demise in a plane crash in 1942, shrouded in mystery. Official accounts asserted he was on a military mission, yet the questions lingered. What was he doing on a flight far from battle? Why did a civilian accompany him? And why did information about the crash remain classified for so long? Conspiracy theories filled the void left by the unanswered questions. Yet amidst this intrigue, the undeniable truth was that George, despite his advantages and allure, battled an addiction that profoundly impacted, and perhaps even shortened, his life. The royal narrative sanitized his struggles, merging them into tales of valor and duty, but the documentations of his life unveiled a stark reality, one of a royal soul caught in the tension between image and identity. This pressure to conform and the silent suffering it birthed would echo through subsequent generations, notably affecting his brother, who bore the weight of an addiction concealed behind closed doors, quietly resonating in a life of perceived duty. Prince Henry, Duke of Gloucester, a figure shrouded in quiet elegance and restraint, was born in 1900, while the world was flanked by drama and upheaval. In stark contrast to his younger brother, Prince George, Duke of Kent, the embodiment of charisma and adventure, Henry was a diligent royal, preferring the shadows to the limelight. Rarely did he grant interviews, keeping his sentiments tucked away, and thus remained largely unnoticed by the public. Yet, behind this serene facade lay a deeply personal battle. Prince Henry harbored a long-term struggle with alcohol dependence, cloaked from public awareness. As the third son of King George V and Queen Mary, he was thrust into royal duty, marked by exposure yet curtailed by influence. Amid the expectations of his lineage, Henry pursued a path common for royal spares, military service. He upheld his duties with understated grace, embodying the ceremonial roles across the Commonwealth. His life was devoid of scandal, free from the riveting headlines that often engulfed his siblings. However, murmurs of his private struggles began to surface. Unlike his more vibrant brothers, Henry's relationship with alcohol was discreet and constant, as echoed by his aides. In an era where heavy drinking was a staple among the elite, his dependency became notable not for its flamboyance, but for its endurance and management. Internal palace communications, later revealed through royal staff interviews, indicate that Henry's drinking became a regular affair, often enjoyed in the solitude of evening hours. His temperament remained calm and composed, yet he drifted further into the shadows, becoming increasingly reclusive. As his public engagements dwindled, concerns about his health and vitality emerged, attributed to factors like age and fatigue, overshadowing the underlying issue of his alcohol use. Memoirs from his private secretaries detail his fragile state, noting adjustments made to his schedules based on daily readiness, with measures taken to restrict the length of public appearances and manage refreshments discreetly. Despite these challenges, Henry displayed unwavering loyalty to his royal role, never seeking sympathy or deviating from established protocols. His struggles never toppled the monarchy nor captured media sensationalism. Instead, they quietly entwined with his identity, a balm for a life demanding stoicism with little fulfillment. As he faced health crises in the 1960s, the palace attributed his decline to natural causes, sidestepping the weighty shadow of his years of drinking. Passing away in 1974 at the age of 74, he slipped from public consciousness but lingered in royal memory as a steadfast, if solitary, figure. Prince Henry's narrative, though understated, resonates within a lineage of royals who bore their hardships in silence, masking their pain from the public eye. Among his ancestry lies another enigmatic figure from the Victorian age, a prince whose early demise was entangled with addiction, leaving behind not just a dubious legacy but a meticulously hidden royal story. Prince Albert Victor, born in 1864 and passing away in 1892, stands as one of the most enigmatic personalities within the annals of the British monarchy. Often affectionately dubbed Eddie, he was the firstborn son of what would become King Edward VII, positioned firmly yet precariously as heir apparent. Yet, beneath the regal facade loomed a young man adrift in expectations, beset by frail health and the fluttering whispers of scandal. His untimely demise at the tender age of 28 was publicly mourned as a cruel twist of fate, yet a far more intricate narrative lay hidden beneath the trappings of royal solemnity. Eddie's life was shrouded in the shadows of chronic issues with alcohol and gambling, troubles deftly concealed from the public eye by the palace's extensive discretion. Right from his youth, Albert Victor displayed a struggle to meet the lofty standards set for a royal heir. While often described as charming, he was seen as somewhat intellectually constrained, an understated way of saying he was distractible and easily swayed, never fully grasping his educational requirements or duties. Those responsible for his upbringing, from educators to military officers, found him exasperating to guide. Nonetheless, they acknowledged his kind-hearted nature and eagerness to impress. Yet, this gentleness proved to be a double-edged sword, leaving him vulnerable to the vices that consumed many of his contemporaries. By the time he reached his early 20s, whispers suggested Albert Victor had developed a significant fondness for drink, not unusual for the aristocracy of that era, but in his case, it seemed to burgeon into a consistent habit. Frequenting gentlemen's clubs notorious for card games and late-night brandy, he soon found himself entwined in a network of whispers about his inebriated appearances following social engagements, a euphemism for overt intoxication. Rumors also circulated concerning gambling debts, their extent obscured by a lack of formal records, a testament to the royal family's adeptness at managing image over reality. With debts settled and narratives smoothed over, the palace machinery proved unhelpful in genuinely addressing these troubles. As his life waned, Eddie's health deteriorated. He exhibited growing signs of fatigue and illness. The official account attributes his demise to influenza during the 1891-92 pandemic, a swift and deadly turn resulting in pneumonia. Yet, many contend that his immune system had already been compromised by years of excessive drinking, poor nutrition, and potential substance misuse, with some historians speculating on the use of morphine, a common but harsh sedative of that period. When he passed, an immediate wave of public sorrow followed, with newspapers echoing heartfelt tributes and Queen Victoria herself reportedly in deep mourning. In a flash, the royal family reorganized the line of succession, neglecting the broader implications of Albert Victor's lifestyle choices. His younger sibling, George, ascended to the throne as King George V, while Albert Victor faded into the shadows of history, a royal spectre remembered more for his unrealized potential rather than the struggles he faced. His vices, vulnerabilities, and subtle unraveling folded seamlessly into the Victorian culture of repression and fabricated memories. Officially, he remained a prince of promise. Yet, those closest to him understood he was already losing his battle long before the fever seized him. And thus, the cycle persevered, as the throne never promised solace or peace of mind. In the ensuing tale, we will discover how the burden of migraines and the weight of divine right compelled a king to seek refuge in opiates disguised as medical relief, as his crown rested precariously upon clouds of meticulously managed oblivion. 18. King William IV, A Life of Complexity. Born in 1765, King William IV's life before the crown was a tapestry fraught with adventure and tumult, resembling the plot of a never-ending saga. As the third son of George III, he lived as a sailor, a figure who attracted scandals, and a reluctant royal thrust into a role he never expected to embrace. His decades spent in the Royal Navy were marked by strict discipline and a robust culture of camaraderie where alcohol was a faithful companion, shaping his character. The sea became an educator, teaching him to seek solace in strong spirits, a habit that would trail him like a shadow into the opulent halls of Buckingham Palace. Publicly known as the Sailor King, William wore this title like armor, a blend of pride and pragmatism that earned him respect and down-to-earth appeal. Yet beneath this facade lay a profound struggle, a persistent reliance on alcohol rooted not within royal gardens but among the bustling taverns and cramped quarters of naval vessels. This pattern of drinking emerged from the harsh realities of naval life, evolving into a ritual deeply entrenched over years of emotional distance. Historical accounts reveal that William indulged heavily during his Navy days, where rum, brandy, and fortified wines graced the officers' tables. His sparse diaries present glimpses of his usage of tonics and restoratives before and after official engagements. Colleagues noted his increasingly erratic behavior during nighttime, which was often brushed aside as eccentricity but is now acknowledged as evidence of chronic alcohol consumption. Upon his reintegration into royal duties, he was labelled unpredictable and occasionally volatile, traits that did little to mellow with time. In 1830, the sudden death of his brother, George IV, unexpectedly ushered William into kingship, leaving the nation braced for upheaval. Contrary to such fears, the new ruler displayed unexpected competence, albeit with personal habits that were discreetly monitored by his loyal staff. Unlike his brother, who cloaked his dependencies in grandeur, William preferred to normalize his drinking, indulging nightly with aids ensuring his supply remained consistent and unseen. His temperament could spiral following several drinks, prompting prime ministers, notably Lord Melbourne, to master the delicate art of managing a tipsy monarch's outbursts while averting a political crisis. To the public eye, William's vulnerabilities were recast into endearing traits, his rough edges signifying authenticity, projecting an image of a king relatable to his subjects. Satirical sketches of the time immortalized him as a cheerful figure raised in toast, not as a figure of mockery, but as a beloved figurehead embodying the spirit of the common man. When William passed away in 1837 at the age of 71, a remarkable feat for his era, he left no legitimate heirs, merely a muddled legacy characterized by constitutional moderation intertwined with personal chaos. His struggles with addiction, never publicly recognized, enriched the folklore surrounding the Sailor King. And as history turned its pages, a new kind of royal awaited, a monarch cloaked in piety and secrecy, whose spiritual pursuits could not shield him from his own demons, perhaps only amplifying them. King Charles I, who lived between 1600 and 1649, is often remembered more for the dramatic end of his life than for his reign. Executed before his own people, he was a monarch toppled not by an enemy army but by internal strife, becoming a lasting emblem of the clash between sovereign authority and popular dissent. His life, wrapped in both reverence and tragedy, unveils a deeper, less publicized story. Behind the grandeur of the crown and the tumult of civil strife, Charles battled chronic, debilitating migraines and a hidden reliance on opium tinctures, a secret that often blurred the lines between royal duty and the haze of medication. In stark contrast to his more flamboyant lineage, Charles' court was marked by restraint and piety. Lacking the theatrical flair of his son, Charles II, and the magnetic charm of his father, James I, Charles was stoic and often haunted by the relentless pain that could strike without warning, leaving him weak and confined to his chambers. Medical professionals of the time referred to his ailments with euphemisms, acknowledging his struggles with what they termed royal heaviness. Yet, the surviving accounts and letters suggest he suffered from severe migraines, managed through the only relief available then, opiate tinctures, particularly a potent blend known as LDAM. This concoction, a mixture of alcohol and opium, served as both pain relief and a quiet snare. While it allowed him to perform during crucial audiences and negotiations, the toll remained significant. The king's struggle with this dependency was not openly acknowledged. However, private notes from physicians reflected concerns over increased dosages. Even as the burdens of leadership heightened with impending civil war, Charles sought solace in rituals and the solace offered by his tinctures. It's important to note that while there's no proof of hedonistic abuse, there's substantial evidence suggesting he could not fulfill his monarchical obligations without them. Charles' execution in 1649 marked a pivotal chapter in British history, solidifying his martyr-like image among royalist supporters, who depicted him as a serene figure facing death with dignity. Yet, the story of his opium use was conveniently omitted, creating a narrative that overlooked the struggle behind the crown. In this paradox of public perception versus private torment, he was emblematic of future monarchs, born amid contradictions, who would navigate the complexities of power through both battlefield strategies and indulgent libations, his own dependencies hidden behind the facade of royal charm. In the annals of royal history, Prince Augustus Frederick, Duke of Sussex, stands as a figure both unconventional and quietly tormented. Born in 1773, he was the son of King George III, yet his path diverged sharply from that of his brothers who engaged in political battles and military campaigns. Augustus's rebellion was subtler, one that questioned the stringent traditions of the royal court and the constraints of his station. Contentment evaded him, and he sought solace in opium-laced sleeping tonics. Though never a candidate for the throne, Augustus embraced a certain freedom rooted in this understanding. This sense of liberty permitted him to defy the Royal Marriages Act boldly, marrying a commoner not once, but twice, shunning the expectations of Georgian nobility. However, beneath this cloak of public defiance was a man plagued by deep-seated unease. His letters revealed debilitating insomnia and relentless anxiety that clouded his ability to engage meaningfully with the world around him. In a time when treatment for psychological distress was a matter of tinctures rather than talk, Augustus relied increasingly on nightly tonics containing L-demum, a potent mixture of alcohol and opium, widely accepted in the early 19th century. As his life progressed, these concoctions transformed from remedy to necessity. His household records unveil a routine of nightly administration. His valets noted his dependency, revealing that he could hardly find rest without his evening draught. Despite these private struggles, Augustus remained a figure of influence, advocating for Jewish emancipation and supporting the arts and sciences while serving as president of the Royal Society. Yet, observers noted a certain detachment in his demeanor, mistaking his sluggishness for aging rather than the repercussions of his nightly indulgences. Remarkably, his use of opiates escaped public scrutiny, veiled under the guise of medical need with no perceived threat to his royal image. Therefore, the evening potions flowed unchallenged. Prince Augustus passed away in 1843 at the age of 70, mourned as a benevolent royal who carved his own path. The complexity of his personal battles, his clandestine marriages, his insomnia, and his reliance on sedatives, was carefully obscured from a historical narrative. Yet, his life serves as a precursor to another royal story, one where a woman's delicate constitution became a topic discreetly veiled in the genteel language of Victorian norms, a reminder of the hidden struggles tethering the fabric of royal existence. In the realm of history, few figures resonate like Princess Mary, Duchess of Gloucester and Edinburgh, whose life spanned from 1776 to 1857. As the final surviving offspring of King George III, she stood as a living testament to a bygone era. By the time of her passing, Mary, outliving her siblings and even her niece Queen Adelaide, became a silent bridge between two centuries, a princess marked by the transformative tides of monarchy. Often remembered as the beautiful daughter or the modest aunt of Queen Victoria, her legacy holds a more intricate story. Far from being at the forefront of political drama, Mary navigated a precarious existence within royal circles, occupying a position significant enough to matter yet vulnerable enough to be overlooked. Her public appearances were rare, and her personal life grew increasingly confined, especially following her marriage to her cousin, Prince William Frederick. Lacking children and becoming more isolated, Mary's life was clouded by the presence of younger, vibrant royals of her time. Consequently, she became known within palace walls for her routine, embodying a life heavy with habit. Behind the facade of her composed demeanor lay a battle with declining health, a struggle not uncommon among women of her era. Described as having fragile nerves, a vague term that masked various ailments, Mary experienced constant discomfort, compounded by frequent headaches and fatigue. In an age with minimal understanding of mental health, the remedies available were often peculiar, chiefly including ladanum. This opiate tincture was dispensed freely to women of her status, becoming as routine as their afternoon tea. For Mary, ladanum served as a relief amidst the burdens of emotional strain and the trials of aging. Years after her death, her personal physician's notes unveiled a pattern of reliance on restorative tinctures and nightly elixirs. Her letters, which once overflowed with vibrance and enthusiasm, grew terse and sporadic, revealing her longing for solitude and the soft embrace of a tonic's comfort. To the external world, however, she maintained an air of grace, celebrated as a survivor, the last child of a once mad king who weathered the upheavals of empires with unflinching composure. Yet this admirable exterior was supported not by scandal, but by gentle hands of physicians and measured doses that masked a deeper struggle. When Princess Mary passed away at the age of 81, she left no children to chronicle her life, nor any salacious anecdotes to enliven the gossip columns. Her legacy remained polished and dignified, untouched by controversy. However, lurking beneath the graceful image was a narrative of suffering, shrouded in the ambiguity of nerves and dependence disguised as care. In the wake of her life, another royal silence was poised to unfold, safeguarding a young prince burdened by a rare ailment, whose existence remained hidden, swathed in the secrecy of medication and high walls, a haunting echo of the monarchy's concealed tribulations. In the tapestry of the House of Windsor, one figure emerges with an enigmatic presence: Prince John, the youngest offspring of King George V and Queen Mary. His story, shrouded in secrecy, speaks to the darker corners of royal life. Born amidst grandeur in 1905, John was destined for a life under the royal gaze, yet he spent much of his fleeting years far from the spotlight, removed from public engagements and ultimately, history itself. Officially, he battled severe epilepsy and developmental hurdles, yet behind closed doors, the handling of his condition involved a troubling reliance on early medications, barbiturates and sedatives, administered under the guise of treatment. Initially, John's upbringing mirrored that of his royal siblings, filled with nannies, tutors, and formal gatherings. However, by the tender age of 4, the cracks in this royal facade began to show. His seizures and developmental delays diverged sharply from the expectations of an aristocratic upbringing, transforming him from a cherished child into a source of concern. In a family where decorum and stability reigned supreme, John's unpredictability became perceived as a liability. Gradually, he was withdrawn from royal functions and retreated into a more secluded life. By 1917, at just 12 years old, he resided at Wood Farm, a quiet spot on the Sandringham estate, where he was cared for by a devoted nurse and largely isolated from the public and even his own family. Official documents describe him in euphemisms, delicate and nervous, while the truth lay hidden in a regimen of sedative treatments aimed at curbing his condition. This period marked a troubling approach to epilepsy, a mixture of isolation and chemical control. Barbiturates, newly popular at the time, were deemed essential for reducing seizures and calming John's turbulent behavior. Constantly under the scrutiny of royal eyes, these medications were viewed as protective measures, yet they bore a heavy price. Their side effects often left John lethargic, emotionally muted, and distant even from his closest companions. Those who cared for him saw the gentle nature of a boy enveloped in a world smaller than most, routine strolls, a regulated medical regimen, and the sparse company of caregivers as his only interaction. The royal family, whether due to distance or the advice of physicians, seldom visited. This absence meant that John became a royal figure in name only, deprived of the involvement that accompanies monarchy. When he passed away in 1919 from a significant seizure, his funeral was a solemn affair, private, understated, and dwarfed by the aftermath of World War I. The media referred to him as the obscure prince, while palace statements highlighted a sense of relief that his pain had subsided. It wasn't until later that the deeper narratives of John's life began to surface, revealing a tale laced with dependence on medication, a dependency shaped by medical necessity and social norms rather than a conscious choice. His experiences remain largely unchronicled in royal narratives, and his photographs seldom graced public displays. Yet, his hidden plight underscores a poignant reality within the monarchy. Some lives are too unpredictable for the royal imagery, and some dependencies are quietly foisted upon them. As the century progressed, another royal tale unfolded, one of a future king, charismatic and stylish, embarking on his own troubling journey into dependency, not with barbiturates, but with stimulants, alcohol, and alleged consultations with dubious physicians, where healing and harm intertwine in the shadows of royalty. In the annals of history, few figures are as enigmatic as King Edward VIII, whose fascinating journey spanned from 1894 to 1972. Before he famously relinquished his throne for love, there lay a complex dependency that took root far removed from the traditional notions of power or duty, his reliance on the unpredictable comforts of stimulants, alcohol, and the peculiar practices of private medicine. Once a playboy prince, then a fleeting monarch, and ultimately an exile, Edward is remembered for his impeccable style and controversial romance with the American divorcee, Wallis Simpson. Yet hidden beneath this charismatic exterior was a subtler, quieter struggle, an addiction that was neither overtly dramatic nor destructively chaotic, but a constant presence, meticulously managed behind the scenes throughout and even beyond his reign. During the vibrant Roaring Twenties and into the early 30s as the Prince of Wales, Edward mesmerized Britain with his charisma. He danced, rode, spoke publicly, and crafted an image of a modern royals who was approachable. However, sustaining such an image required a toll, one that eventually revealed itself in the form of substance use. Declassified files and testimonies from those close to him tell a tale of Edward becoming acclimated to amphetamines, then known informally as pep pills, often prescribed by an array of private doctors, including the infamous Dr. John Bodkin Adams, rumored to exploit his aristocratic clientele. Although no formal records definitively link Dr. Adams to Edward's prescriptions, numerous accounts from that era hint at the prince receiving energizing injections leading up to significant appearances. The amphetamines brought about surges of vitality and unyielding confidence, which, combined with his considerable yet discreet alcohol consumption, created a personality that oscillated between magnetically engaging and unpredictably reckless. His entourage characterized Edward as effervescent yet volatile, passionately engaged in some matters while wholly indifferent to others. The public, however, witnessed only the polished exterior, the prince in finely tailored suits, eloquently addressing crowds. Behind the scenes, MI5 was already voicing prolonged concern about his growing dependence on stimulants and the questionable influences of physicians within his social circle, as noted in a stark 1936 memo warning of the possible political motives behind his medical advisors. After his abdication, Edward's reliance on these substances merely transformed. Living as the Duke of Windsor in exile, he continued to seek medical enhancements, often timed with public engagements or simply to alleviate boredom. Correspondence from the 1940s shows his ongoing fascination with alternative medicine and energy boosters, while his alcohol use became a routine, quietly enjoying drinks before and often after dinner. It wasn't scandalous. Rather, it blended seamlessly into the fabric of his life away from royal obligations, yet the old habits never truly faded. By the time of his passing in 1972, Edward had turned into a mix of nostalgia, criticism, and subtle historical unease. Few brought up his medications or drinking habits, instead focusing on his fateful choice to forsake the crown, overlooking the dependencies that may have compelled such a decision. Meanwhile, the palace he abandoned stood resilient, occupied by another figure weathering the tumult of global conflict. This queen, steadfast, dignified, and composed, eschewed stimulants for gentle sedatives, her unwavering grace never allowing even a teacup to tremble in public, exemplifying a contrasting form of strength during turbulent times. In the annals of history, Queen Mary reigns as an emblem of steadfastness from 1867 to 1953. As the consort of King George V and the matriarch of sovereigns, she was never once marked by sentimentality. Her presence was sculpted into the rigid formality of Edwardian style, an image of cold grace and haunting beauty. A woman of precision, she engaged in linguistic corrections during conversations, catalogued China with unmatched diligence, and expected her lady-in-waiting to exhibit the poise of a duchess even in moments of near fainting. Yet beneath her polished exterior, the facade bore its fractures. Behind the unwavering surface, unseen shadows lurked. During the tumultuous periods of the First and Second World Wars, she reached for sedatives and stimulants to cope with the deep emotional scars inflicted by national strife. The impact of war on Britain's monarchy was profound, and though Queen Mary stood as a symbol of imperial fortitude, the weight of that symbolism grew burdensome with every loss and assassination threat her family endured. Amidst political turmoil and personal sorrow, she was expected to personify national stability. For years, palace aides and medical personnel maintained a strict silence regarding her health. Any vulnerability was deemed unacceptable. However, Hidden documents reveal a different narrative. A woman reliant upon prescribed barbital to quell anxiety, wrestle with persistent fatigue, and maintain her public appearances. These potent sedatives, prevalent in the early 20th century, were meant to bring her restful sleep and soothe her nerves. Medical records from the 1910s onward detail her use of restorative drops and soothing potions. Throughout the Blitz, as the world around her descended into chaos, she remained remarkably composed. This calmness, it appears, was cultivated through careful chemical management. In her advanced years, she turned to stimulants during lengthy public engagements, not scandalous substances, but prescribed with the intent of sustaining her royal obligations, her routine uninterrupted by the tumult outside the palace walls. What sets Queen Mary apart isn't merely the substance use but its seamless integration into royal life, a dependency that posed no threat to her carefully crafted image. She radiated strength and stability, never wavering, never faltering, preserving the image of regal perfection through upheaval and adversity. Her passing in 1953 preceded the coronation of her granddaughter, Queen Elizabeth II, marked by global tributes that overlooked her extensive medicinal regimen. She fulfilled her duty, maintaining her composure and endurance. Yet, not all royals could find solace in such substances. Some chose a different path, meeting stress with fiery vigor and, in one instance, with an unshakable habit of brandy that would etch his name into history, not as a dethroned ruler, but as one famously and indulgently inebriated. King James II, who lived from 1633 to 1701, stands as a figure wrapped in the complexities of power and personal turmoil. Before the tumult of exile and the glorious revolution forced him to abandon England, James sought to assert control, not just over his kingdom and its court, but also over a growing dependence on brandy. History remembers him primarily as the Catholic king who alienated his Protestant subjects, yet beneath the surface lies a more intimate story. In contrast to the extravagant lifestyle of his brother, Charles II, James presented a facade of piety and adherence to divine right. But behind closed doors, he nurtured a clandestine affinity for brandy, one that began during his naval years and intensified through political strife. James' fondness for the spirit revealed itself in the correspondence of his contemporaries. His peers, including diplomats and members of his own circle, noted an increasing dependence on alcohol, particularly during times of stress. A French observer during his exile remarked that the king seldom let a glass escape his grasp, indulging profoundly yet maintaining a facade of composure. This notion of never appearing disorderly allowed James to uphold the illusion of control, despite its underlying cost. Within his court, his drinking was largely overlooked, accepted as part of royal life, especially in an era when brandy held a near-medicinal reputation. However, the habitual nature and emotional underpinnings of his consumption raised quiet alarm among those close to him. One chaplain documented concerns over how heavily James relied on the bottle during his more challenging moments, which were numerous throughout his troubled reign. His sudden transition to Catholicism, once a private matter, erupted into a public crisis upon his coronation, leading to noble defections and societal unrest. As the birth of a Catholic heir stoked paranoia and chaos, James increasingly turned to rituals, prayers, and brandy to find solace. After his deposition in 1688, James fled to France, maintaining a public persona as a noble victim of fate. Yet, even in exile, his drinking habits drew remarks from his fellow expatriates. A Jesuit advisor subtly suggested that his spirit needed comforting, hinting that brandy remained his refuge. James passed away in 1701 not with grandeur, but through a quiet decline in someone else's opulent domain. While history officially remembers him as a steadfast king of faith, Whispers linger of a monarch who drank his way through the slow disintegration of his perceived rightful legacy. His story resonates in the shadows of Windsor, recalling another naval figure, similarly reticent, dedicated, with a cigarette often poised between his fingers, navigating the turbulent waters of duty and desire. Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, lived from 1921 to 2021, embodying a multitude of roles that defined his remarkable life. From naval officer to consort, war veteran, environmentalist, and a notorious headline maker, he maintained a stoic demeanor, never revealing vulnerability to the public eye. For over 70 years, he stood as a supportive figure just behind Queen Elizabeth II, nodding when it suited, frowning at appropriate times, and expressing thoughts that others hesitated to voice. His identity was steeped in unvarnished honesty and pragmatic realism. Yet, beneath the surface, one aspect of his life remained largely unspoken: his enduring dependence on nicotine, an addiction quietly managed and kept from the public gaze. Philip took up smoking in his teenage years, a common practice among his peers. By his days as a young naval officer during the tumultuous times of World War II, cigarettes became an integral part of his life, as essential as his medals. The Royal Navy not only accepted smoking but actively encouraged it, with tobacco often rationed alongside food and munitions. Smoking offered soldiers and sailors a sense of relief, camaraderie, and routine. But for Philip, it became more than that. It was a constant companion. By the time of his marriage to Princess Elizabeth in 1947, he was allegedly smoking up to 20 cigarettes a day. Photographs from these early years frequently catch him with a cigarette just out of view or with smoke discreetly curling around gestures of greeting. Despite the omnipresence of smoking in his life, the public was mostly oblivious, not due to lack of practice, but owing to the palace's adeptness at managing the perception of the royal family. Queen Elizabeth reportedly urged Philip to quit smoking soon after their wedding, and while he complied on the surface, whispers among palace insiders suggest a cycle of quitting and relapsing ensued. The pressures of royal life, combined with his known restlessness and aversion to idleness, clashed fundamentally with the idea of complete abstinence. For years, he ingeniously found ways to indulge his habit while keeping it out of sight. Ashtrays were artfully situated in his private spaces, and staff were advised to remain silent about it. Photographers were subtly dissuaded from capturing unscripted moments during royal duties. This concealment stemmed not from shame. Philip was confidently unbothered by embarrassment, but from a sense of responsibility. He was profoundly aware of the significance of public image. As the royal family evolved to become more polished and scrutinized, his private indulgences had to be managed behind closed doors. The cigarettes never fully vanished, yet they melded seamlessly into the backdrop of his life, discreet and ever-present. Surviving to the age of 99, often heralded as proof of his robust health, few reflected on the decades spent smoking or the quiet efforts to keep this truth from public scrutiny, nor on the delicate balance he maintained between personal satisfaction and public expectations. He passed away as he lived, just outside the limelight, steadfast, disciplined, and filled with contradictions. While Philip's addiction remained tucked away, future royals were set to step into the light, not cloaked in the shadows but facing their tribulations with raw honesty, suffering laid bare for all to see, as shared in whispers and chronicled by tabloids. This revealed truth would be spoken by the one who lived through it, herself. In the opulent world of royalty, where every gesture is steeped in decorum and every portrait meticulously crafted, there lies a concealed narrative that few official accounts dare to tell, the story of dependency. Beyond the lavish facades and the shimmering crowns, histories of compulsion lie cloaked in silence, often edited or denied. From opium-laced tea to brandy during royal councils, their addictions lurked quietly just out of sight. How do you uphold an image that must never falter while your personal life slowly frays at the edges? This exploration unveils 30 British royals and the concealed vices they bore beneath their regal status. Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe for more intriguing tales. And take a moment to tell us from where you're tuning in. Whether it be midnight or midday, let's connect with fellow seekers of royal history tonight. First up is King George IV, whose years spanned from 1762 to 1830. History portrays him as a vibrant, extravagant prince regent, a monarch decked in luxurious fabrics and adorned with wigs, renowned for his grandiose banquets. Yet beneath that gilded surface lay a man crumbling under the weight of formal expectations and personal demons. George wasn't merely addicted to extravagance. He was ensnared by the very substances that offered him relief. Top of that list were alcohol and a potent sedative known as laudanum, a catch-all remedy for ailments of the heart and mind in 19th century Britain. Unlike others who used it desperately, George indulged in laudanum as if the lines separating pleasure from addiction were blurred beyond recognition. His love for strong drinks was insatiable. Wine, brandy, gin. He consumed them in staggering amounts, often before dignitaries. His lavish dinners served up dozens of dishes, not for enjoyment, but as a display of indulgence itself. What renders George IV's saga so poignant and unsettling is the stark contrast between his perceived strength and the concealed chaos of his dependents. Court artists painted his likeness to hide the truth. In reality, he had ballooned to over 20 stone and required assistance navigating stairs. He was a monarch of facade, adept at maintaining a public image while privately battling health issues, with whispers of a liver the size of a turkey circulating among his circle. Rumors suggest his decline may have stemmed from the psychological trauma inflicted by his tumultuous marriage to Caroline of Brunswick and the loss of his cherished daughter, Princess Charlotte. Perhaps it also sprung from the heavy burden of ruling during a decline he could hardly admit to. Outsiders in the palace learned to manage George's unpredictable mood swings and substance-driven episodes on a daily basis, leading to a cycle of dependency exacerbated by constant medical interventions. As his health faded, he continued to uphold the image of stability that the nation craved. Upon his death, the news was delivered with appropriate gravitas, omitting any mention of his hidden struggles. Thus, the myth of the royal image endured, clean, stoic, untouchable. But reality whispered a different truth. Even kings can succumb to their habits, and often, the more lavish the disguise, the more troubled the soul beneath it. But George wasn't the sole figure camouflaged by indulgence. His very son ascended the throne, projecting charm while secretly journeying through a haze of his own. Fast forward to Princess Diana, born in 1961 and left to the world in 1997. Known to many as the People's Princess, her life was a contemporary fairy tale marred by deep tragedy, a cascade of ball gowns, heartbreak, and global acclaim that sometimes eclipsed Buckingham Palace itself. Yet behind her public persona, Diana was grappling with the relentless weight of royal expectations. In her battle, she turned to discreet dependencies, disordered eating, sleeping pills, and antidepressants, leading to periods of emotional detachment that would only be revealed through her own words. Early in her royal journey, Diana presented an image that sparkled outwardly yet revealed shadows of strain internally. Her beauty captivated the press, yet those close to her discerned a growing unease. At 20, she found herself thrust unprepared into a role steeped in scrutiny and pressure, leading to strained attempts to maintain control over the chaos surrounding her. Diana openly discussed her struggle with bulimia, a burden that remained hidden behind palace walls. This began shortly after her engagement, morphing into a method of coping with the acute pressures she faced. But the battle was not confined to food alone. Throughout the 80s and 90s, She resorted to prescription medications to quell her anxiety and insomnia. These sedatives were often couched in the language of rest, but they led to a state of sedation rather than stability. Unlike traditional tales of royal addiction, Diana embodied a different narrative. She engaged with the public, delivering speeches, visiting minefields, and uplifting those facing AIDS, appearing unstoppable despite her emotional battles. By the 90s, the cracks in her facade began to reveal themselves. She candidly addressed her struggles in private tapes, interviews, and in her groundbreaking 1995 Panorama broadcast, acknowledging behaviors tied to her emotional turmoil. She steered clear of the term addiction, yet the evidence of her reliance on various means of coping was unmistakable. When Diana passed, an overwhelming wave of grief swept the globe. The royal family's response was cautious and heavily scrutinized, as the woman they had tried to manage and ultimately separate from their narrative transformed into a symbol of emotional authenticity in death, something the institution was ill-equipped to manage. Her legacy, complicated and beloved, remains framed by her mental health struggles and the hidden truths of her journey. These similar challenges would later echo through generations, touching the lives of those raised within the very institution designed to shield them, a poignant reminder that the battles of dependency transcend title and lineage. King Edward III, 1841 to 1910 in the realm of royal indulgence, King George IV shrouded his vices in velvet and elegant portraits. In stark contrast, his great-grandson, King Edward III, skillfully masked his own excesses with an irresistible charm, an enchanting quality that made people overlook the mischief of his other hand, the whereabouts of his fortune, or how many cigars he had consumed before noon. Before ascending the throne, Edward spent a staggering 60 years as the Prince of Wales, biding his time for his mother, Queen Victoria, to pass. Alas, she lingered for much longer than he anticipated. The outcome? A man burdened with an abundance of time, wealth, and a lack of responsibilities. A deadly combination for an already compulsive future monarch. Edward's principal vices were gambling and tobacco, pursued not in a gentlemanly fashion, but with relentless fervor. He reportedly enjoyed between 12 to 20 cigars daily, not to mention his constant cigarette breaks. His cigars were imported, meticulously cut, and stored to his precise preference, as if they were sacred relics. They accompanied him in meetings, carriages, meals, and even by his side in death, a steadfast assertion of control in a life where control was limited, particularly amid the overwhelming presence of his mother's influence and the political currents she navigated alone. While his gambling was less frequent, it was certainly more scandalous. Edward favored high-stakes betting, losing staggering sums across Parisian casinos, the back rooms of Monte Carlo, and among the grand drawing rooms of Britain. One of his most notorious losses transpired during a private baccarat game in 1890, which erupted into a scandal when details reached the public. Newspapers delicately alluded to indiscretions, but historians later uncovered the truth. Edward had undermined royal protocol, engaging in gambling that would have landed others in jail. Yet somehow, these issues never tarnished his reputation, partly due to his humor and charm, and partly thanks to friends skilled in obscuring his secrets. Behind the palace walls, aides attempted to manage the king's public image, the letters revealing unease concerning the smoke that clung to his garments and the gambling debts flooding in. Despite complaints about his oppressive cigar smoke infiltrating every fabric of the palace, both literal and diplomatic, no one dared confront him too stridently. His title as heir to the throne granted him a formidable degree of untouchability. By the time Edward officially assumed the role of king in 1901, he was already 59 and frail, the impact of smoking unmistakable. His reign was short-lived, lasting just 9 years, but he cultivated a persona as a grand diplomat, a king who straddled both the regal courts and the roulette tables, capable of charming anyone in the room before the haze of smoke had lifted. Though his addictions never made it into official records, they would later emerge in memoirs and whispers among the elite, without directly denting the mythos he crafted. Edward III is primarily remembered not as a man in decline, but as one who transformed vice into leisure, a monarch untroubled by the burdens of consumption or loss. However, the arrival of his son, George V, heralded a starkly different addiction, one subtle, methodical, and insidiously lethal. Not a tempest of indulgence, but an age of quiet dependence. 2 Kings chronicle the story, with many more to uncover beneath the royal veneer. Prince Harry, Duke of Sussex, born 1984 for much of his life, Prince Harry appeared destined for the archetypical role of royal second sons, supportive yet marginal, the younger sibling designed to stand back while his elder brother took the lead. Initially, Harry embraced this identity with what seemed like playful defiance, embodying the spirited prince, a soldier-turned-partygoer, a roguishly relatable royal whose loud laughter and wild antics made headlines, often for the wrong reasons. Yet beneath the facade of vivacity, Harry grappled silently with internal distress, becoming increasingly reliant on alcohol and cannabis to drown out the chaos surrounding him. What differentiates Harry's narrative is not the substance dependence itself, but his bravery in confronting it head-on. In his memoir, Spare and numerous interviews, he candidly discusses his years of heavy drinking and drug use, his efforts to numb the emotional pain that he struggled to articulate. This raw admission of addiction was unprecedented in the royal family. Harry laid bare his reality on tabloid front pages and later in his reflective writings. The trauma of losing his mother, Princess Diana, at just 12 left an indelible mark, intertwining him with the institution yet confining him within its constraints. Publicly ordered to maintain a stoic appearance, he felt adrift privately. He later described these formative years as a blur of anxiety and anger, emotions to mask, not express. Alcohol became his routine escape. Colleagues and friends characterize his drinking habits as not just consistent but heavy, particularly during his early 20s while navigating London's nightlife until dawn, exhibiting erratic behavior that media casually dismissed as youthful delinquency. However, Harry reframed this turbulent period as self-medication to quiet his inner demons, panic attacks, grief, and an ever-looming resentment. Cannabis also became part of this healing strategy, offering relief during private moments away from scrutinizing eyes. Strikingly, Harry's openness marked a significant shift in royal tradition. Within a family characterized by silence and veneer, he chose honesty. He sought therapy, explored guided psychedelic treatments, and discussed mental health concepts like EMDR and PTSD, topics rarely addressed among royals. Harry's narrative didn't aim to glorify past habits. Instead, he grappled with the discomfort of vulnerability amid an institution built on silence. Yet amidst the backlash, accusations of oversharing arose from critics and traditionalists dismayed at his departure from royal decorum. Regardless of the judgment, Harry's story stands as a rare royal acknowledgement of addiction, a candid portrayal of humanity instead of a source of shame. But even in contemporary times, not all royal struggles are confronted this openly. Across the royal family tree looms another prince, older, more restrained, and less willing to divulge, whose own compulsions remain veiled yet unmistakably accompanied by whispers, allegations, and the intricate signs of a different, unacknowledged dependence. In a world of royal expectation, King George V, born in 1865 and reigning until 1936, found himself bound by a sense of duty that balanced precariously on the addiction to cigarettes. Unlike his father, Edward II, who revelled in the lavishness of life, George adhered to a strict, almost ritualized routine, embodying a stoicism that felt both admirable and ridiculous. Yet within this disciplined exterior lay an addiction that was both relentless and routine, consuming up to 20 cigarettes a day, not for pleasure, but as a means of endurance. To George, they were not simply a vice. They were an essential part of his existence, a tool employed to manage the burdens of kingship amidst an empire slowly unraveling. Behind the scenes, his routine unfolded in silence, with morning rituals revolving around tea and a cigarette in what could almost be deemed a secular sacrament. Yet the burden of leadership weighed heavily on him. The public remained unaware, their perception sculpted by a careful public relations effort that painted George as a figure of stability. Even as his health deteriorated, marred by bronchitis and chronic throat problems attributed to his smoking habit. Even when illness loomed, royal narratives downplayed seriousness, masking the truth that George relied on oxygen treatments and medication to maintain appearances. His death in 1936 echoed this narrative. Reportedly from lung complications, it was orchestrated to align with the morning paper's timeline rather than reflect reality. Meanwhile, Prince Andrew, Duke of York, born in 1960, became known as the Party Prince, a title he embraced during his youth. This reputation set him apart from the more reserved royals, injecting an element of excitement into his persona. However, as time passed, this moniker shifted in tone, shedding its playful nature to reveal deeper concerns about his compulsive behaviors, particularly surrounding gambling and sex. While the royal family has maintained silence on Andrew's private life, the whispers of addiction linger, often thriving in the shadows of power and privilege. Andrew's gambling has been subjected to scrutiny, with frequent visits to high-stakes casinos as he navigated the fine line between duty and indulgence. His spending patterns prompted questions about the source of his funds, casting a shadow over his lifestyle that appeared propped up by covert financial arrangements and favor trading. Moreover, allegations concerning his association with convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein have thrust him into a chaotic public narrative, dominated by speculation of sexual compulsion and a troubling insistence on ego-driven validation. Though he categorically denies wrongdoing, the mounting evidence creates a cloud of suspicion that hints at a man ensnared in compulsions lurking beneath a facade of privilege. Even as he distanced himself from public life, losing titles and royal patronages in 2022, the dialogue surrounding his behaviors remained muted, with the monarchy opting for silence instead of acknowledgement. Despite the modern era's push for transparency, addiction persists in shadows, weaving through royal legacies, as the current monarch balances his own public persona with the complexities of private indulgence, a delicate dance that, despite all pretense, reveals the inescapable truths that underpin a life lived in the spotlight. In the intricate tale of history, King George VI emerges as an unlikely figure. Ascending to the throne from 1895 to 1952, he is not celebrated for accomplishments alone, but rather for the arduous struggle he endured to fulfill his royal duties. Often chronicled as Britain's quiet wartime hero, he was the stuttering monarch who found his voice in critical moments to uplift a nation. Yet, this narrative cloaks a deeper truth, a man burdened by anxiety, seeking solace in alcohol and cigarettes, much like his father before him, viewing them not as luxuries but as essential crutches. Born the spare heir, George was overshadowed by his charismatic elder brother, Edward VIII, and never anticipated becoming king. However, when Edward abdicated in 1936 to marry Wallis Simpson, George was thrust into a position he neither desired nor felt suited for. He coped with rigid routines and a growing dependence on the things that subdued the harsh reality of royal duty. His smoking habit, which began in youth, burgeoned by his 30s to over a pack daily. By 40, this habit had intensified, hidden skillfully by aides who curated his public image, concealing the evidence of his struggles. George's relationship with alcohol was equally troubling. Unlike his father, who celebrated drinking, George sought a quiet comfort in gin and stronger spirits, using them to ease the pressures of public speaking and the relentless demands of his role. His former staff revealed that he would often take a drink before addresses, chain smoking to recover from a strain. This reliance wasn't for pleasure, it was survival. His health, already fragile by the 1940s, was carefully masked from the public, as doctors gently navigated the truth of his deteriorating condition. In 1951, a surgical intervention revealed the gravity of his situation. Lung cancer, removed but never publicly acknowledged. He returned to duty, facade intact, smiling through pain, even during poignant moments like his farewell to a departing Princess Elizabeth. He succumbed in 1952, his official cause noted as coronary thrombosis, while the truths of his life echoed a different narrative of struggle against stress, addiction, and silence. The monarchy had exacted its toll, leaving behind a facade of dignity that belied the king's turbulent existence. Yet, as another reign began, it became clear that the next generation would wield the legacy of both indulgence and restraint. Then there is King Charles III, born in 1948, previously known as Prince Charles, a figure woven by tradition yet tinged with personal eccentricities, a man who, amid protocol, engaged with his environment deeply, including plants. In stark contrast to his brother's excess, Charles's royal journey was characterized by a subtle attention, a quiet struggle with substance that never spiraled into public crises but mirrored a long-standing pattern of royal dependency born from discomfort. Throughout his youth, he wielded herbal sedatives and enjoyed the occasional Scotch whisky, using them to cope behind palace walls. His time as heir apparent, mired in public expectations, weighed heavily upon him. Balancing the image of a poised prince with an inner world of frustrations, he often sought relief from anxiety in potent herbal concoctions. His regimen, filled with late-night uncertainty, revealed not scandal but a human need to find stability amidst the chaos of royal life. As a young prince, despite conjuring an image of majestic calm, he secretly depended on alcohol during solitary evenings. His familiar routine included precise measurements and solitary enjoyment, a practice seen by palace aides as tolerable within the royal sphere. In time, gentle nudges from advisors aimed to steer him towards healthier habits slowly reshaped his existence. Charles eventually grew into his role, finding purpose in climate advocacy and personal fulfillment. Now, as king, he embodies discipline and poise, yet echoes of his past linger, a reminder that even amid centuries of royal tradition, the monarchy remains a profoundly human institution, capable of both magnificence and frailty. The rituals of solace and dependency endured through time speak to the ultimate mystery of nobility, a persistent quest for balance in lives tethered by expectation.